With President Bola Ahmed Tinubu having released the names of members of his cabinet, his promise of 35% affirmative action for women in politics may have hit the doldrums. Of the 48 ministers to be released for screening at the National Assembly, only 9 of them are women, amounting to just about 19% of the total number. Some sections of the Nigerian women populace have expressed their disappointment with the president's inability to keep to his word. However, there are also glimmers of hope, as President Tinubu is believed to have improved on the previous administration's quota to women, but fell short of the record set by the Goodluck Jonathan administration of women representation in government portfolios. Now, joining me tonight in Politics HQ to delve deeper into the issue of women representation in government is Adenike Aloba, Program Director, Dataphyte, joining us from the nation's capital, Abuja. One welcome to you, Adenike, and thanks for joining us in Politics HQ tonight.
Thank you for having me tonight.
Now, Adenike, the recent nomination of only a minuscule 9 women out of 48 members in President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's cabinet has sparked concerns about gender representation. Could you provide an analysis of the broader implication of this underrepresentation on women's participation in Nigerian governance?
In thinking about just the conversation tonight, one thing that, immediately jumped out at me is when President Tinubu was making the promises of 35%, I doubt that anybody went, oh yeah, so it's done now. Women are going to be better represented. We have nothing to worry about. I'm sure everyone knew that there was going to be a lot more work to be done. Everyone understood that it was very possible and very likely that it wasn't going to make that quota. And that is where we are today with the representation in his cabinet. We're clear. I think that at this point in Africa, in Nigeria, we are clear of we're clear of the challenges of underrepresentation. What we haven't seem to be able to connect is those challenges with the reality of lawmaking, decision making, distribution of resources, and all these other key things that ultimately form what governance looks like. And that again is the challenge that we will be having if the cabinet remains so. Because again, when it comes to decision making, we already see how the National Assembly is playing out with the representation of women, and we see what's happening across the states where there is even less representation in these new governments that have been sworn in. And so we know that the challenge is it's going to be even more of an uphill task to keep the voices going strong, to keep the advocacy going strong. And I know it's sad that we are here today still talking about advocacy and still talking about won't you do it, when we should be talking about the implication or the results of having better representation. But here we are. Let me go back and let me refer back to what I said at the beginning, that I have been clear, and I think across a number of places and conversations in places where the gender equality conversations is coming up, where gender representation in governance is coming up, we have been very clear that it's not going to happen simply because during an election period we have come up and said, oh, let there be more women.
A candidate made promises.
Yeah, it's going to happen if the advocacy and the work is consistent. It's not a 1-year to election project, it's a 4-year project. And even then, it's a continuous, non-stop project. The problem is that in a country where male to female is almost 50-50, and then we have representation in governance this poor, no one can hold up their chest and say, oh no, don't worry, we're making good decisions for you guys. And a good example of that is how all the gender bills were shut down, and how much work and how much talk still needs to be done to even get some of those bills reconsidered. And so I think across board, this is clear indication that it's not time to rest, it's not time to sit down, and it's not time to put back our resources and pick it back up in when is the next election now? In 2023, 2026, saying, oh, now it's time to talk. This is the time to refire, to keep the conversation going, to not let this go lying down. This cannot be a conversation that just happens 3 days, there's the opera, and then we keep quiet. the fire has to continue to be lighted, and we have to continue to carry this
Okay.
conversation forward. The implications are grave.
The implications are grave indeed. Now, Adenike, you mentioned trust, and you seem not to have believed it when the president made a campaign pledge of 35%
Yeah.
affirmative action for women in government appointment. And now this has been questioned because, look, these appointments have been made and it didn't hit the 35% of his promise. Now, how critical is the alignment between campaign promises and actual representation, and what strategies should be employed to ensure political leaders fulfill such commitments?
Again, I don't think it's so much an issue of trust as much as is realism, in that if a president is going to make choices for his cabinet, clearly, I mean, and this is Nigeria, so I'm not even going to mince words and say, oh, they're just going to look for the best brains, and there are a lot of women who have good brains. Yes, we know that there are a lot of women who have good brains, but we also know the part that politics and all of these things play in the nomination for ministerial positions and government appointments and across board. So if APC could not put forward female candidates across board for governorship, for houses of assembly, for House of Representative across states, it would have been naive of us to assume that he had some pool of resources to tap into to come up with 35% representation. So it's less an issue of trust and more a challenge of realism to say that, okay, we're watching you, but we're not just going to sit down and say, oh, yeah, you've promised. The linkage between campaign promises and actual actions by government is critical. And I think that time and time again, I mean, we saw how the last administration played out and all the conversations we've been having here on News Central and across board, about what needs to change, what needs to happen. I think that the social contract between elected officials and the people needs to be stronger. And I think that there is one power that citizens have that maybe we have not used fully. It's the power to light fire under these people, to say that we're watching, to call out every time, to have conversations every time to say, you have not fulfilled this promise and we're not going to keep quiet about it. And we're going to consistently ask you about it. And I
But,
know
but, but
that
do we
when
have
it
to
is
wait
possible,
till an election year to keep our politicians on
so
their
that's,
toes?
yeah, so that's what I'm saying. That's where I'm getting to, that it's not a 1 year election year project. It's consistent. It's that citizens have to be engaged. I said this throughout the elections period, from the campaign leading up to the elections. Look, I know we're all focused on getting more people to vote. I know we're all focused on getting more people to go out and to talk about elections, but our focus needs to be wider. We need engaged citizens. One of the conversations I have been having and some of the work that we're doing at Dataphyte is this, that gender equality conversations need to become local. So it's not just a few people showing up on TV, showing up on YouTube that are having these conversations, that everybody in their small communities, in their local governments, in their wards, understand the importance of having representation, and so can keep that conversation going, not just when elections is about to happen. So here's the thing. The people that are going to put forward their tickets for 2027 are already doing the work. How can we be advocating for better representation or better anything if we're waiting until 2026 to start our own work? And so we need end-to-end citizen engagement. And I was going to say that where it is impossible to get 200 million Nigerians to go and knock on the door of the president, the media has a critical role in setting agenda to keep these conversations going, to create linkages between every act of government, what that means for the campaign promises, and how citizens should interpret and should respond to it. Because it's just commonsensical that not everybody is going to have the president's number and to say, not everybody is going to have their governor's number and say,
Yes.
oh, why is there no representation? But we need to keep, like we're having the conversation today, we need to keep that conversation consistent. Every time a decision is made, every time an action is being taken, see, all of this conversation about who in Niger and the actions that government is taking, nobody, I haven't heard a conversation that is looking at the implications for women and children, both in the country, for women and children, and just basically the implication of war on women and children. This is what happens where you don't have good representation, simply because men do not have that point of view. I say this thing all the time. We can't simply sit back and blame and say, why are they not doing this? And I know there are a lot of people who say, even if women are not represented, once they make their needs or something known to the men in the room or to the people in the room, then they can carry forward. But the reality is, and on the spur of the moment, when you're thinking of challenges and solutions, you can't think beyond what is within your frame of reference and your point of view. And this is the importance of representation.
And I
And so
dedicate
we
this.
have to keep this conversation going. Yeah.
It brings me to this question of the notion of, because you mentioned something quite instructive about, the men are there, they will do what the women want. This notion of half bread is better than none has been identified as a factor contributing to citizens' hesitance in demanding accountability. Can you elaborate on the psychological and social factors that lead to this mindset and suggest ways to shift it towards a more assertive stance?
Yeah. First off, I empathize with the mindset. Look, we have all heard this, the symbolism where you put an elephant in a space, you tie it down, when you remove the rope, the elephant doesn't move away. So these are people, there are generations in this country today who have not known any other government, who has not known any other kind of way of governance except to see corruption end to end. So those kind of people, when you then tell them, well, why don't you take this at least this is working, you can understand how that becomes a reasonable conversation. However, in the spaces where we know better, and again, I'm not attempting to say, oh, there's an elite that knows better or there are some people who know better. I'm just saying that there are people who know better, people who have the benefit of history and people who have the benefit of experience to push for better, to say, no, this is not enough and we have to demand better. Those who know have then the responsibility to help those who don't. And like I keep saying, this is not a one-off project. It was maybe a little bit of my criticism around how we were going about representation and how we're going about participation in last elections. That look, we have to give people a broader scope than simply getting their preferred candidates into the room. And it's the same thing that has to happen with the ideology of, well, half a bread is better than none. With the ideology of, because I know that there are a few people who say, at least there are 9 women on the ministerial cabinet, at least he has done better than Buhari, but he has not done enough. And while we're not saying we don't see that he has done that, we can acknowledge something that is good and say that it can be better. And I think that this is the sense in which those of us who are doing advocacy, whether that's civil society, whether that's media, all civic actors have to be cognizant of this, to say that yes, we can acknowledge a good and still work towards making that good better. And in fact, if we're being frank with the ministerial nominations, this doesn't even necessarily qualify as a good, if we're being frank. 35% to just about 14 or 15% is not exactly a pass mark. And so it has to be okay
It lives a
to say
lot.
that, and it has to be okay to engage that way. Yeah.
It does leave a lot to be desired, and there's still room for a lot of improvement. Now, Adenike, some analysts have mentioned and highlighted patriarchy as a factor that relegates women to support roles in politics. Could you delve deeper into how patriarchal norms and attitudes influence political dynamics and how they might be challenged to promote greater gender inclusivity?
So there's several. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
So there's several lenses from which to view this, and it's that if historically, if people have been told they do not deserve or they do not qualify to hold a position, then imagine what that does to the psyche of the people who are paving the way for that position to be had. I'll break that down a little further to say that even though, we just had the UN report that says that it's going to take about 100 years, and that gender biases are still very prevalent in urban and rural areas combined. And so the reason is because if year and time again you have heard that, oh no, this role is preserved for certain kinds of people, you can then understand, for instance, in elective positions where people begin to consider, well, maybe this person is not able to hold this position. And so if you're looking for a way in which patriarchy is helping to perpetuate this underrepresentation that we're seeing in governance, this is one way. It's that people are just wired. the preeminent sociologists, our culturalization, are just wired to question or query whether or not a woman is able to perform. And so in that way, that, yes, you can see it. A layer onto that is that if those biases exist, and again, you are in a room where you're making decisions. So I dare any political party to present their board of directors and to present their board, and we'll count how many women are in those boards. And again, that's just a perpetuation of what we know to be patriarchal norms that are now having effect. Because if there were more women in the room to possibly begin to change perspective, to do the work of, no, we can do it differently, then we will begin to have better results. And again, this is just, and where I like to describe it this way: where people have held power, nobody wants to yield that power. Whether that's subliminal in their thinking, in terms of, oh no, whether that's obvious in terms of, oh no, we just don't want women in the room, or subliminal in thinking, well, they've never been in the room, why should they be now? They should be fine. Whether you're aware of these biases and how it affects your decision making and how it affects your doings or not, those biases exist, and those biases are a result of the patriarchal society that we live in. And so this is the challenge. Again, I'm going to go back to kind of talking about solutions to say that the only way to challenge something that is existing, a norm, is to present a higher norm, or to present a higher truth, or to present a more profound truth. Data has told us time and time again that, and I use this phrase very loosely, because now I'm not talking about sameness, I'm talking about equality. I'm saying that data has told us that there are things that are not necessarily gendered. The ability to lead, the ability to take positions, to take decisions, to take leadership is not determined by biology, whether you're male or female. And so there's a lot of confusion, between, the biology of women and what it allows us to do, and our sociology and our brains, the psychology, and all of these things like this. And so in these ways, we see the effect of a patriarchal society perpetuated in our culture, perpetuated by religion, and all of these things. We see the effect in that, but how do we counter this? We then have to present a different narrative, and that narrative has to be held up consistently. It has to be held up consistently. A lot of consistent work has to be done to change this narrative that has existed years and years and years before we even came to be.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time and insight. Adenike Aloba, Program Director, Dataphyte, joining from the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. We do appreciate your time and insight. Thank you.